So, the second part of philosophy is Socratic method, which we call Dialectical method or Socratic method. It's also known as Elenchus or Elentic method or Socratic debate because it is a form of an argument or a cooperative argumentative dialogue between individuals, which is used to stimulate the critical thinking and to draw out the ideas and underlying presuppositions. It is a form of discussion in which the defense of one point of view is questioned. One participant may lead another to contradict themselves in some way, thus weakening the defender's point. This method is named after the classical Greek philosopher Socrates, and this was introduced by his student Plato. Because we couldn't find any Socratic books and Socrates' writings, so Plato, whatever we know about Socrates, it's just through Plato. Plato introduced Socrates to us by playing a role of a midwife. An example of a Socratic method or dialectic method is one person questions that what is truth. The other persons or the defenders defend that the truth is what we are certain about. Then the person A, which questioned in the first place, asks again that what is certain? Then here comes the series of questions come and go, and then we come to an end where we have no doubt or no other questions left. So this is kind of a contradiction plus dialectic method, which was first introduced by Socrates. So Socratic method is a method of hypothesis elimination because we need to eliminate the hypothesis. And the better hypotheses are found by steadily identifying and eliminating those that lead to contradictions. In any discussion, we're going to eliminate or we're going to remove those contradictions, and we are going to a certain answer or certain point without any contradiction in that. This method is also known as deduction method. You guys might know what deduction is. Deduction is a process of research that we delete or remove all those factors which are otherwise our conclusion. So we're going to prove our conclusion only true, and we consider all the factors which are true just to make our conclusion or results true. I hope you get it. The Socratic method searches for general, commonly held truths that shape people's beliefs and scrutinizes them to determine their consistency with other beliefs, because Socrates was the one who actually made people used to think and who introduced knowledge in that way. The basic form is a series of questions formulated as tests of logic and fact intended to help a person or group discover their beliefs about some topic. Okay, so when this method actually developed, in 5th century there was two schools of thought. One we call the Sophists. They were the teachers who specialized in using the tools of philosophy and rhetoric, but we call it more they are rhetoric, to entertain, impress, or persuade an audience to accept the speaker's point of view. Okay, they were like they persuade an audience or they insist an audience to accept the speaker's point of view. Whereas the Socrates were he promoted an alternative method of teaching which came to be called the Socratic method, and Socrates never persuaded or never insisted or never forced audience to accept the speaker's point of view. In fact, Socrates let the audience to think by their own minds. That's what we call dialect. Okay, he didn't make them follow a path blindly, but he showed them the path, and he showed them the initial beginning and asked them to follow their own mind and rationality. Now, Socrates began to engage in such discussions with his fellow Athenians after his friend from youth. He has a habit to question each and everything, whereas Sophists did not let people to question about anything. So that's the main difference. Now, Plato formalized the Socratic eclectic style in prose, presenting Socrates as a curious questioner of some prominent Athenian interlocutor, okay, which we call Socratic dialogue. Plato had a different method to philosophical discussions, namely dialectic. Now, what is the method? Lenches, argument of disproof or refutation, cross-examining, testing, scrutiny, especially for purposes of refutation. It is Lenches is the central technique of Socratic method. Now, what was Lenches and what is Lenches? It is the purpose of refutation. It is the cross-examining. You do not follow things blindly. You need to cross-question it. You need to counter-question it. You need to test it yourself by your rationality. This is a Lenches. And this is the central technique or central method of Socratic method. Okay? The Latin form Lenches, used in English as a technical philosophical term. The most common adjectival form is in English is elentic. Okay, in Plato's early dialogues, elenchus is the technique. Okay, we got it. Socrates uses to investigate, for example, the nature or definition of ethical concepts such as justice or virtue. According to Vlastus, Socrates' interlocutor asserts a thesis, for example, courage is endurance of the soul, which Socrates considers false and targets for refutation, because Socrates never ever believed in the first place. He used to refute things, he used to counter question the things, he used to examine the things. Socrates secures his interlocutor's argument to further premises. And now this is the game of premises. The major premises, the minor premises, and finally the conclusion. So he he come for premises. For example, courage is a fine thing and ignorant endurance is not a fine thing. Then he argues and the interlocutor agrees that these further premises imply the contrary of the original thesis. In this case, it leads to courage is not endurance of the soul. Socrates then claimed he has shown that his interlocutor's thesis is false and that its negation is true. Now, okay, you need to understand this method very, very finely because this method is going to be used in Hegel dialectical method. So you need to understand the basis of this method, which starts from the Socrates. Okay, now one electic examination, it can lead to a new, more refined examination of the concept being considered. In that case, it invites an examination of the claim. Courage is wise, endurance of the soul. So you see, the first argument, the first premises is just a rough statement. Then the second one is a bit more uh, refined or refined. The third one would be the better than the first two. So this series or this chain of questions goes on and on till we get a final output on which nobody can doubt, on which one can actually rely on it. Freder points out that Vlast's conclusion in step number 4 above makes nonsense of the okay, just leave it. This is not related to uh, because these are the examples you need to give in the exam if you want to, because you need to understand, you need to make the examiner understand this procedure and this method. Now come to the application of this method. Socrates generally applied his method of examination to concepts that seem to lack any concrete definition. For example, the key moral concepts at the time, the virtues of piety, wisdom, temperance, courage, and justice. Such an examination challenged the implicit moral beliefs of the interlocutors, bringing out inadequacies and inconsistencies in their beliefs and usually resulting in aporia. In view of such inadequacies, Socrates himself professed his ignorance. Okay, but others still claim to have knowledge. He said himself that okay, maybe I'm an ignorant, but the others were like, no, we have knowledge, we know things. Socrates believed that his awareness of his ignorance made him wiser because he said himself that he is ignorant, and his awareness of his ignorance, he feels like it makes him wiser than those though who though ignorant but they still claim to have knowledge. While this belief seems paradoxical at first glance, it has in fact allowed Socrates to discover his own errors where others might assume they were correct. Now, what he actually did, he used the claim of wisdom as the basis of his moral exhortation. He actually worked on the virtues of life, of nature. So, what he did, he claimed that the chief goodness consists in the caring of the soul concerned with moral truth and moral understanding, that wealth does not bring goodness, but goodness brings wealth and every other blessing, both to the individual and to the state. This is what he believes. And life without examination, which examination means dialogue. He says that life without examination, without dialogue, is not worth living. Socrates, he didn't use this method to develop consistent theories, instead using myths to explain them. So this is the motive for modern usage of this method, that these are not necessarily equivalent. Parmenides' dialogue shows Parmenides using the Socratic method to point out the flaws in the Platonic theory of the forms as presented by Socrates. So you see, this is just the refutation of the predecessor and make their theories more worthwhile. What is the purpose of this method? Instead of arriving or finding the answers, the Socratic method, it was actually used to break down the theories they hold or we hold, to go beyond the axioms and postulates we take for granted. So it's not to find an answer, it's actually to find to go beyond the axioms or the postulates we have or we take for granted. Therefore, myth and the Socratic method are not meant by Plato to be incompatible. They have different purposes and often described as right hand and left hand paths to go to good and wisdom. Okay, so I'm just going to summarize this, what I taught you. Socratic method, which we call a dialectic method, it is all about stimulating the critical thinking, because the sophist, that school of thought, it never allow people or allow audience to think. It meant to just accept the speaker's point of view as it is. In other words, sophists wanted people to accept the speaker's mind and speaker's thought. Sophists did not develop the thinking thing in people. Whereas Socrates, he was opposite to the Sophists. He wanted people to think by their mind, to think rationally, to contemplate on the things which they can see around themselves. They just don't go blindly and follow others and their rules. They must know what they are going to follow. This is the difference between the Sophist and the Socrates, and that's why we call the Socratic method is the dialectic method, because it is the method of the contradiction. When the people used to, when there's a contradiction, they used to negate it. And it may be right or may be wrong, but that negation actually gives you the proper and good answer. Okay, so people used to think over it and they won't be ignorant, and they have to attain more and more knowledge. This is all about the Socratic method. I hope you understand it. If you have any queries, ask me. Thank you.